supposed to be a joyful thing, the union of two families, the celebration of love. But when I opened the ivory envelope that arrived one Tuesday morning in June, my heart didn't lift. It tightened. The handwriting on the front was sharp and deliberate. Mrs. Evelyn Carter. Inside. The invitation was thick, glossy, unnecessarily ornate. Pale gold lettering embossed on eggshell cardstock. The kind of invitation you don't send because you want people there. You send it to show them what you can afford. I ran my fingers across the names printed at the top. Olivia Ann Whitmore and Ethan James Carter. My son's name, elegant and clean, looked foreign next to hers. It wasn't that I didn't know Olivia. I knew her very well. I'd spent the last year pretending not to notice how her voice changed when she spoke to me in front of her friends, how she offered me wine through gritted teeth, how her smile never quite reached her eyes when I complimented her. But I also knew my son loved her. He had fallen hard and fast. When I first met her, she looked like a magazine cover come to life. Tall, slim, flawless makeup, with a laugh that turned heads and a gaze that could slice through steel. Olivia was dazzling. Yes, but kindness had never been part of her shine. I looked back at the RSVP details. Black tie ceremony, country estate venue. Guests are encouraged to dress appropriately for formal photo opportunities. The words may as well have said, "Don't embarrass us." I folded the invitation carefully and placed it back into the envelope. The next morning, I called Ethan. "Hi, sweetheart," I said as cheerfully as I could manage. "I got the invitation." "Oh, great. Did you like it?" His voice was bright, maybe too bright. "It's lovely," I replied, quite formal. There was a pause. "Yeah, well, you know Liv's family, they're really big on presentation." "I see." Another pause. Then, "Mom, listen, about the seating arrangements. Liv wanted to keep the head table small, just the bridal party and parents of the bride." "Not the groom's parents?" "Well, just the bride's parents, for photo symmetry. But you'll be seated close. You'll love the view." He meant the view of them, her family, basking under chandeliers while I sat quietly at a distance. I swallowed. "Of course. That's fine, honey. I knew you'd understand. You always do." "Yes." That was my role, the understanding one. The mother who didn't make waves, the woman who stayed small so others could shine. The week before the wedding, I went shopping for a dress. I walked into a boutique downtown, one of those places with assistants who look you up and down like they're scanning your price tag. I tried on a few dresses. None of them made for women shaped like me. Real women, with real hips, a real belly, and arms that had lifted too many boxes and babies to be dainty. In the mirror, I saw a reflection of a woman who no longer belonged to any world but her own. The dress I settled on was a navy blue gown with lace sleeves and a simple A-line cut. Elegant, modest, appropriate. The salesgirl didn't say much when I paid for it, just rang me up, bagged it, and gave me a perfunctory, "Have a nice evening." I walked home with the dress carefully folded over my arm, watching the younger women pass by in crop tops and careless laughter. They hadn't yet learned how invisible the world makes you after 50. That night, I pulled out my old photo album. Inside were pictures of Ethan as a baby, chubby-cheeked and gummy-grinned. Photos of me at 28, sitting cross-legged on the floor, feeding him mashed peas, laughing like I had all the time in the world. His father had been gone for years now, a quiet heart attack one night in his sleep. I'd raised Ethan on my own, working 2 jobs so he could have seconds. I gave him everything. And now he was marrying into a world I had no place in. But I wasn't bitter, just tired. Tired of pretending that I won with every passive-aggressive comment. tired of smiling through the slow erosion of my dignity. I closed the album, placed it on the shelf, and turned off the light. The house was silent except for the creaks that come with age, the same way my bones creaked now. The morning of the wedding. I stood in front of the mirror. The dress fit better than I pinned my hair back, applied soft lipstick, and fastened the pearl necklace Ethan had given me for Mother's Day 5 years ago. I looked at myself. Not glamorous, not wealthy, not young, but steady. There was still something left of the woman who had built a life from scraps and sleepless nights. I slipped on my heels, took one last breath, and walked out the door. The estate was bigger than I'd imagined. White columns, ivy-wrapped terraces, fountains. Staff dressed in black and white glided like shadows across the stone pathways. I stepped out of the cab and took a moment to adjust my shawl. Around me, guests in satin and silk gathered in flocks, clinking glasses and comparing vacations in Santorini. No one greeted me. No one noticed. Until I saw Ethan standing near the entrance. His tux was sharp, his hair slicked back. He looked like a man who belonged here. "Mom," he said, embracing me briefly. "You look beautiful." "Thank you, sweetheart." Olivia appeared a moment later, radiant in white lace, her hair a golden halo. She glanced at my dress and offered a brittle smile. "So glad you made it." "I wouldn't miss it." She leaned in, whispering with a sugar-coated voice. "Don't worry. We'll get plenty of shots of you. From the waist up." My stomach clenched. She was already preparing the joke. I made my way to my seat, not near the head table, not even with family, just close enough to be present, far enough to be unseen. I folded my hands, looked at the grand chandelier above me, wondering if it would fall. Part of me hoped it would, and yet, despite it all, I sat tall. Because I didn't raise my son to be ashamed. Because I had earned my place at this table with more than money. Because no one could take away my worth unless I gave it to them. And I had no intention of giving it away. Not yet. Not tonight. The ceremony started late, fashionably so, I imagined, because someone had decided the lighting would be better for photos closer to golden hour. Everything was curated, every moment choreographed like a stage play. A string quartet played near the rose garden, their instruments gleaming under the setting sun. Gold-accented chairs lined the aisle in symmetrical rows, and someone had scattered white petals with unsettling precision. I sat on the outer edge. Not the last row. Olivia's polished for that, but certainly not where a mother usually sat. To my right was a woman in emerald silk and diamonds the size of blueberries on her ears. She introduced herself as Olivia's aunt. The guests around me talked in soft murmurs, chuckling at inside jokes and sipping champagne flutes. No one offered me one. A server passed by with a tray. I reached for a glass and caught a flicker of hesitation in his eyes before he plastered on a smile. As if he wasn't sure if I was a guest or hired help, I took the champagne anyway. Let him wonder. Then came the hush, the collective inhale of an audience trained to expect perfection. The music changed. The bridesmaids filed in, elegant in matching silver gowns, each step measured. Ethan stood at the front in his tailored tuxedo, hands folded, face calm but unreadable. When Olivia finally appeared, everyone turned, necks craned, phones raised, mouths agape. She looked beautiful. I couldn't deny it. The kind of beautiful that photographs well, the kind people compliment with words like regal and timeless. But I couldn't stop looking at Ethan, my son, my baby, standing straight as a soldier, eyes fixed on her as she glided toward him like a queen. And I wondered if he felt as alone in that moment as I did. The vows were brief, rehearsed. Olivia read hers from a card, peppered with rehearsed jokes and a quote from a romantic movie. Ethan's voice cracked when he spoke, but only slightly. I saw him glance toward me once. Just once. A flicker. A moment. I smiled at him. Because that's what mothers do. The officiant declared them husband and wife. Applause followed like a wave. I clapped gently, hands cold. Photos came next, endless groupings, orchestrated like military drills. I was summoned only once, for the groom's side picture. Olivia barely turned her head toward me. The photographer called, "Mother of the groom!" A little to the left. No, a bit more. Yes, right there. Perfect. And smile. I smiled. Later, I realized I'd been cropped halfway out of the frame in the version they posted online. The reception was held inside a glass-walled ballroom overlooking a private lake. Candle-lit tables glowed under a ceiling strung with fairy lights, and a string of initials, O+E, floated in roses above the stage. I found my seat at table 9, tucked between two couples I didn't know. One of the women introduced herself with a practiced voice. "Oh, you're Ethan's mom. You must be so proud." "I am," I said. She smiled. "And what do you do?" "I'm retired now. I was a receptionist for 25 years. There it was, the subtle shift in her eyes. Polite withdrawal. She turned back to her husband without another word. I listened quietly as Olivia's family gave speeches. Her mother wept daintily. Her father boomed about legacy and tradition and marrying well. Ethan didn't say much. He toasted, thanked guests, mentioned me briefly with a rushed, "And my mom, Evelyn, who raised me." No anecdotes, no warmth, just a footnote in his new life. The music played. Dancers took the floor. I stayed seated, watching plates being cleared and champagne flutes being refilled, until the microphone clicked again. Olivia stepped up to the stage, her dress shimmering under the lights, a fresh glass in hand. "I just want to say a few words," she cooed, tipsy but confident. "Thank everyone for being here, for making this the best day of our lives." She paused for effect, scanning the room like a performer waiting for the applause cue. Then her eyes landed on me. "And of course," she said with a smirk, "to my new mother-in-law, who proves love really is blind, because only love could convince a woman her size to squeeze into that dress." Laughter. Laughter that sliced through me like broken glass. A few guests chuckled uncomfortably. One woman gasped audibly. Someone whispered, "Did she just call her a pig?" I sat still, frozen. The blood drained from my face, but my cheeks burned hot. Ethan didn't move. He looked stunned, not angry, just small. The worst part wasn't the insult. It wasn't even the laughter. It was the silence from my son. I stood up quietly. Someone called my name. Maybe. I don't remember. I only remember the weight of my purse, the sting behind my eyes, the echo of my heels on the polished floor. I didn't run. I walked. Out through the grand hall. Past the valet. Into the cool night air, where my breath finally returned to me. I didn't cry. Not yet. Not until I reached the parking lot, far from chandeliers and violinists and roses. Only then, under the cold, unfiltered moonlight, did I let the tears come. Not just for the insult, not just for the shame, but for the part of me that had believed I'd finally be accepted, and for the son I raised, the boy who had once held my hand when crossing the street, who now couldn't find the courage to stand beside me. I sat in the car for a long time. Hands on the wheel, engine off, in the silence, something shifted. Not a snap, not rage, just stillness. a quiet resolve settling over me like a second skin. I had been small for so long, invisible, not anymore. I started the engine and drove. Not away, forward. The highway stretched endlessly before me, the lines on the asphalt blurring under the glow of the headlights. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than they should have, my pulse steady but loud in my ears. I didn't know where I was driving. Only that home wasn't the place I'd left behind. Not tonight. The silence inside the car was thick. No music, no talk radio, just the faint hum of tires against the road and the echo of her words replaying in my head like a loop I couldn't shut off. Who proves love really is blind? Each syllable hit differently now, duller and colder with every repetition. It wasn't the first time someone had commented on my weight. The world had always been generous with unsolicited opinions. But it was the first time someone had weaponized it in front of my son, and he'd let it happen. I didn't hate him for it. Not yet. But I knew something had cracked. Something that couldn't be mended with a simple, "I'm sorry." I drove until the streetlights thinned and the night grew heavier, then pulled over at a quiet overlook by the lake. The water shimmered faintly under the moonlight. I killed the engine and sat there, hands trembling now, the adrenaline finally ebbing. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of everything, not just the insult, but the years behind it. The nights I'd skip dinner so Ethan could have seconds. The Christmases I'd spent alone because he couldn't make it home. The birthdays marked by polite texts instead of phone calls. The humiliation wasn't new. It was just the loudest. I leaned back against the seat and closed my eyes. My reflection stared faintly back at me in the windshield, the outline of a woman with puffy eyes. Lipstick faded, pearls catching a faint glint of light. I'd worn those pearls for luck. They had belonged to my mother, a woman who'd believed that dignity was the only luxury poverty couldn't strip away. She used to say, "Never give them the satisfaction of seeing you break." So I hadn't. Not yet. But the silence around me was loud enough to shake something free inside. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and hovered over Ethan's number. My thumb hesitated above the call button. What would I even say? That his wife had humiliated me? That his silence had done more damage than her words? No. He'd already made his choice, even if he didn't realize it. I locked the phone and set it aside. The lake shimmered, soft ripples spreading under the moon's reflection. I rolled down the window and let the night air in, sharp, cool, almost cleansing. It smelled of pine and wet earth, a grounding smell. I remembered something from when Ethan was little. He used to draw pictures of our family, just the two of us, holding hands under a bright yellow sun. He'd always make me taller than him, with a crown on my head. When I asked him once why he drew me like that, he said, "Because you're the queen." The memory ached now, sweet and cruel all at once. Somewhere between then and now, I'd lost the crown. I'd traded it for quiet sacrifices, for bending and shrinking and pleasing. And tonight, that version of me had died in a ballroom full of laughter. By the time I got home, it was almost midnight. The house was dark, still. I slipped off the floor cool under my bare feet. I stood in the hallway, staring at the framed photographs that lined the wall. Ethan at his high school graduation, Ethan with his first car, Ethan holding up the keys to his new apartment. Smiling, all those milestones. I'd been behind everyone. Not for recognition, just out of love. And now, that same love felt bruised. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and sat at the table. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. There, in the stillness, came a question I hadn't asked myself in years. When was the last time someone saw me, really saw me, as more than what I'd given? The answer was simple. Never. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the blinds, slicing the kitchen into golden stripes. My eyes were swollen, my throat raw from crying in the car. I hadn't planned to cry, but sometimes grief sneaks out when pride finally sleeps. I made coffee out of habit, the familiar rhythm of it grounding me. Pour water. Measure grounds. Wait for the slow drip. When the cup filled, I took it to the porch. The neighborhood was waking. Joggers, sprinklers, dogs barking, normal life, unaware that somewhere a woman had been quietly broken and was now rebuilding herself molecule by molecule. I sipped the bitter coffee and stared at the horizon. I didn't want revenge. What I wanted was something cleaner, the kind of justice that doesn't need witnesses. Because deep down, I knew what people like Olivia never understood. When you humiliate someone who has nothing to lose, you create someone dangerous, not out of rage, but out of clarity. And clarity is far more ruthless than anger. Around noon, my phone buzzed with messages. Ethan. Mom. Where did you go? Liv feels terrible. Ethan. Can you please call me? Everyone's asking where you are. Ethan. Don't let one stupid joke ruin the night. A joke. That was the word he chose. I stared at the screen until the messages blurred, then turned the phone off. I didn't need to reply. Let him sit with silence for once. Let him feel what it's like to be unseen. That evening, I walked into my bedroom and pulled open the drawer of my old desk. Inside were papers, bills, tax forms, and at the bottom, an envelope labeled Whitmore Holdings. Inc. My late husband's small garage had once been bought out by them. Richard Whitmore, Olivia's father, had sent the letter himself, written in formal, clinical language. We regret to inform you that your independent contract will be terminated effective immediately due to acquisition restructuring. That letter had ended our business and nearly cost us our home. I'd never forgotten his name. And now, by a twist of irony, his daughter had married my son. I held the letter in my hands. The paper yellowed, corners frayed. I could almost smell the oil and sawdust from those years, the scent of my husband's labor. He died before he could rebuild, but I was still here. And I realized then, as the last bit of daylight vanished through the curtains, that life had an unnerving way of circling back, like unfinished business waiting patiently for its final act. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the drawer. Then I looked at myself in the mirror, still in my plain house dress, no makeup, no pearls, and I whispered quietly, "It's my turn now." The words didn't sound vengeful. They sounded inevitable. Some stories don't end when the world laughs at you. Some stories begin there. I spent the next 2 days in a rhythm of silence. No calls, no visitors. I turned off every notification, ignored every knock at the door. The world could wait. I cleaned the house like I was shedding skin. I scrubbed the baseboards, washed the curtains, rearranged the pantry. It wasn't about the dust. It was about the control. For the first time in years, I wasn't asking permission to exist. I wasn't trying to make myself smaller to fit in someone else's expectations. I had been dismissed, insulted, forgotten. But worse, I had allowed it. That truth sat heavy in my chest, but it also lit a fuse. I started writing a list, not of revenge, not of punishments, just truths. Things I had let go too long. I used to draw. I used to dance in the kitchen. I used to laugh without checking who was watching. I used to dream about opening a cafe. I used to matter to myself. That last one stopped me. I tapped my pen against the table, the ink pooling in a little circle, and I whispered, It's not too late. The next morning, I pulled out my sewing kit, dusty from years of neglect, and took apart the navy blue dress I'd worn to the wedding. It wasn't about the fabric. It was about reclaiming something. Each stitch I undid felt like I was pulling apart the image Olivia had wanted me to carry. Pathetic, oversized, out of place. I repurposed the lace sleeves into trim, chopped the hem into something shorter, lighter. I worked slowly, deliberately, listening to jazz music and humming along when the melody struck a memory. It wasn't the most flattering dress in the end, but it was mine, made by my hands, shaped to my body, not someone else's standards. I hung it by the window and let the sun catch the new seams, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled. Later that day, I went to the library. There was a dusty local history section in the back that no one ever touched. I walked past the shelves until I found what I needed, a stack of articles on Whitmore Holdings, Inc. I remembered the name from the old days. They weren't just a parts company anymore. They were a quiet giant, expanding into manufacturing, tech, even real estate. And Richard Whitmore? Still the CEO, still operating with the same cold, untouchable polish. I read everything. I made notes. Not because I wanted revenge, but because it mattered. History mattered. My husband's work had helped build part of that company. His garage had been small, yes, but mighty. And when they'd swallowed him up, they didn't just take a contract, they took his pride. He died wondering if he'd failed. And now, by some cruel twist of fate, I was tied to that same name again, through a woman who looked at me like I was disposable. The irony was so thick I could taste it. On the walk home, I stopped by the corner cafe, the one with the peeling green awning and chalkboard sign that always leaned a little too far to the left. The owner, Claire, smiled when she saw me. "Haven't seen you in a while," she said. "You okay?" I hesitated, then nodded. "I'm getting there." I ordered a tea and sat near the window. Across the street was a building for lease, old bookstore, closed down last winter. The windows were dusty, but the bones were good. I imagined it. Tables with mismatched chairs, a counter lined with pastries, walls covered in notes and community photos. A place where people like me could exist without pretense. I sipped my tea slowly, watching the way sunlight painted gold streaks across the sidewalk. That little dream, the one years of bills and disappointment inside me again. It wasn't just a fantasy anymore. Maybe it was something I could still reach. When I got home, Ethan was waiting on the porch. I slowed my steps, bracing myself. He stood as I approached, rubbing the back of his neck like he used to when he was nervous. "Mom," he said, voice low. "Can we talk?" I unlocked the door and pushed it open. "Come in." He followed me inside, eyes scanning the room like it was unfamiliar. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd helped him with math homework, where he'd cried over breakups, where every birthday with a lopsided cake. "I'm sorry," he said finally, "about what Liv said." I nodded, but didn't speak. That's something. I froze. "Freeze, Ethan," I said calmly. "You disappeared." He looked down. She was drunk. I held up a hand. "Don't explain her. I'm not asking for excuses." Silence settled between us. He fidgeted, then looked up again. "She said she'd apologize." "She won't." He blinked. "You don't know that." "I know women like her." He sat back in his chair, deflated. "What do you want from me?" That was the wrong question, but I'd spent too long waiting for him to ask the right ones. So I answered honestly, "I want you to figure out if you married her because you love her. or because you think she's what you deserve?" The silence was louder this time. He didn't reply, and that told me everything. After he left, I took out the envelope from Whitmore Holdings again and read it one more time. There was no bitterness left, just a strange clarity. Sometimes it places you in rooms you never asked to be in, and sometimes those rooms are where you reclaim yourself. I picked up my notebook and began writing. Not a letter, not a plan for vengeance, but a blueprint for what comes next for Olivia. Not for Ethan, for me. The next morning, I rose early with a strange sense of certainty pressing against my chest like a heartbeat I hadn't listened to in years. There was no parade of doubts, no mental tug-of-war, only a quiet whispering. Now, go. I dressed with intention. Clean jeans, the blouse I always reserved for better occasions, and the navy blue flats that made me feel grounded. I tucked my notebook into my purse and added an old manila folder labeled Garage Records. Then I stepped out into the day like a woman who'd remembered her name. I drove straight to the address I'd jotted down days earlier, Whitmore Holdings Regional Office. It wasn't a towering skyscraper or anything grand, just a sleek, modern building nestled in a business park lined with landscaped hedges and artificial fountains. Reception greeted me with the usual corporate pleasantries: blonde, crisp blazer, headset. "Do you have an appointment?" "I'm here to speak with someone in legacy acquisitions or archival records." "About?" I pulled the manila folder from my purse and held it up, tapping it lightly. "A company your founder bought out 20 years ago. I believe some of the original patents and trade rights were never formally transferred. I'd like to discuss that." That was partially true. Her brows lifted. "Let me check with Mr. Harlan." 10 minutes later, I was ushered into a conference room with glass walls and a table longer than my kitchen. A man in his 50s entered, pressed suit, clipped voice. At his hand, "Daniel Harlan, head of legal transitions. And you are?" "Evelyn Price, widow of Leonard Price, former owner of Price & Sons Garage, acquired in 2003. He hesitated before sitting. I saw it, just a flicker. But I knew then that the name hadn't been forgotten. What I opened the folder slowly, letting the weight of the years fill the silence. Inside were old invoices, contracts, and a grainy photo of Leonard standing in front of his shop, hand on Ethan's shoulder. "I believe your company still profits off designs my husband created, and while we signed over manufacturing rights, there was never a full IP transfer. That was overlooked." He scanned the papers. "This is quite old, but not irrelevant." He nodded. "Do you have counsel?" "Not yet. I hoped we could resolve it amicably first." He leaned back. "You know this would be an uphill battle, right?" "I've walked steeper hills in worse shoes." That made him smile, just slightly. "I'll take this to our team," he said. "I can't promise anything, but you'll get a call next week." I stood. "I'll be waiting." Outside, I sat in my car and exhaled. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the high of doing something that mattered. I didn't know if the claim would go anywhere, but I had made my first move. Later that afternoon, I stopped by the old bookstore I'd eyed days ago. For lease sign was still up, crooked now. I cut my hands to the glass and peeked inside. Dust-covered shelves, warped wood floors, a tiny loft above what used to be the children's section. It was a mess, but it was my kind of mess. I dialed the number on the sign. A brisk voice answered. "This is Sharon." I told her I was interested in leasing. She asked if I had a business plan. "I'm working on it," I said. "But I'm serious." She agreed to meet me the next day with keys. I hung up and stared at my reflection in the glass door. The same face, the same weight, the same silver streak in my hair. But something behind the eyes was new. Fire. That evening, I cooked a full dinner, chicken roasted with rosemary, roasted potatoes, and a peach cobbler from scratch. Not for anyone else, just me. I poured a glass of red wine and sat at the table with a notebook open to a fresh page. Across the top, I wrote, Cafe, Bookstore, Hybrid. Concept. I started sketching ideas. Mornings, coffee, fresh scones. Afternoons, light lunches, poetry readings. Evenings, book club nights, jazz records, open mic. Shelves filled with donated and curated reads. A quiet corner for mothers, teachers, dreamers. I wasn't a businesswoman, not in the formal sense, but I knew people. I knew comfort. I knew how to create space. And that, I decided, was enough to start. At midnight, my phone buzzed again. Ethan, Mom, Liv wants to meet you, to apologize. Please consider it. Ethan. She talked to her dad. He might want to help fund your project if you're serious about that cafe. I stared at the second message for a long time. Her dad? The same man who had killed my husband's dream, erased our livelihood, and never looked back? Now he wanted to help? No. No amount of money could buy the dignity I was reclaiming with my own 2 hands. I didn't respond. I closed the phone and slid it into a drawer. The next morning, I met Sharon at the bookstore. She was in her 60s. Sharp eyes, she unlocked the front door, stale air together. Not much foot traffic here lately, she warned, and it'll need renovation. I'm not afraid of work. She studied me for a long second, then nodded. It's yours if you want it. First month half off. We shook hands. And just like that, a dream rooted itself in brick and dust. I spent the rest of the shelves, sweeping corners, making lists of what needed fixing. The labor left my back aching, my arms sore, but I slept better that night than I had in years. The dream wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And it had already begun. The days bled together in sawdust and sunlight. By the end of the week, every creak in the floorboards, every spot where the light pooled on the wall just right, every uneven shelf and chip of paint. The bookstore turned cafe didn't have a name, but it was already a living thing, breathing, pulsing, waiting. I spent each morning with my sleeves rolled up, scrubbing, planning. I'd never held a power drill in my life before, but by day 4, handling it like an old friend. There, from the cafe down the street, in with fretting. Look at the dusty cave. You're either brave, she said, handing me the cup. Both, I replied, smiling. I told her about the cafe bookstore vision. Surprise, she didn't laugh again. Instead, she leaned on the counter and said, let me know if you need a hand or an espresso machine. Mine's on its last legs. I've got an old backup in storage. That was the first offer. It wouldn't be the last. By Thursday, word had spread. A few familiar faces stopped by. Old neighbors, 2 retired teachers from Ethan's high school, even Mr. Thatch, the mailman who used to sneak dog treats through our fence for Pepper before she passed. And they all asked the same thing. You're really doing this? Yes. I was. Friday afternoon, just as I finished repainting the front trim, a sleek black car pulled up outside. Olivia stepped out in heels too high for our cracked sidewalks, her phone in one hand, sunglasses perched perfectly on her nose. She walked in like she owned the place. Wow, she said, lips curled in that way that never quite resembled a smile. So this is the project. I didn't put down the brush. What are you doing here, Olivia? She removed her sunglasses, eyes scanning the shelves. I heard from Ethan you were working on this little store. Thought I'd see it for myself. Little. That word landed with precision. I wiped my hands on a rag and finally faced her. Well, now you've seen it. She circled slowly, heels clicking against the wood. You know, my father might be willing to invest. If you let him. He's got a whole foundation for women-owned businesses. You'd qualify. I narrowed my eyes. You mean the same man who bulldozed mine 20 years ago? She tilted her head. Business is business. Evelyn, you can't take it personally. But I can, I said softly. And I do. Her jaw tightened, but she tried a different angle. Look, I didn't come to fight. I came to apologize. About the wedding. I waited. I was drunk, she said. It was a stupid joke. I didn't mean anything by it. You called me a fat pig. Olivia. Her lips pursed. It was a bad moment. But honestly, if you're going to hold on to it forever, that's on you. I stared at her, stunned by how effortlessly she could distort accountability into an inconvenience. You know, I said, voice steady. The thing about power is that people like you think you own it because of money or looks or connections. But real power is waking up every day and choosing to be kind, even when no one's watching. Her face flushed. You think this cafe makes you powerful? No, I said. But the woman building it? She's a lot stronger than the one you tried to humiliate. Olivia's eyes darted around like she needed a quick exit. Suit yourself, she snapped, but don't say I didn't offer to help. She turned on her heels and left. The door shut behind her with a satisfying thud. That evening, Ethan called again. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. Mom. He sighed. Liv told me she came by. She did. And? She offered your father-in-law's money. Long pause. It's a good offer. Mom, he's well connected. If you're serious about this cafe, you should take the help. I stared at the paint on my hands. Ethan, I said. When you were little, ride a bike. Do you remember what I said when I let go? You said, keep pedaling, don't look back. Exactly. He exhaled. You really think you can do this alone? I don't need to do it alone, but I won't do it with people who don't respect me. He was silent again, then softer. I'm sorry for everything. I should have stood up for you. I didn't let him off the hook, but I let him speak. That was a start. Over the next few days, the support came in waves. Claire brought over that espresso machine, along with a box of mismatched mugs. Mrs. Devlin from the flower shop next door dropped off a potted. 3 teenagers volunteered to paint a mural on the back wall in exchange for free pastries when the cafe opened. And one, "Are you the lady starting the bookstore cafe?" she asked. I am. My husband just passed. These were. She placed the box gently I tucked that night. I sat alone in the shop, a single lamp glowing beside me. I ran my fingers across the spines of the books, Hemingway, Baldwin, Angelo, and felt something settle in my bones. Not revenge, not validation, something softer, truer, belonging. In this messy little space, with chipped floors and the scent of lavender and fresh paint, I had carved out a corner of the world where I could be everything I was. Not less, not too much, just whole. By the end of the second week, the cafe was finally starting to take shape. The scent of fresh coffee bird in the air, mixing with the soft aroma of new wood and old pages. The teenagers had finished their mural on the back wall, a whimsical swirl of books turning into birds, flying toward a sunrise. It was imperfect and beautiful, just like the space itself. I had named it the Turning Page, not just for books, but for life. For me. The sign was still on its way, but I'd printed the name in marker and taped it to the window. People noticed. They started stopping in more often. A man on his lunch break looking for something to read, a young mom hoping to breastfeed in peace, a retired couple who brought a thermos of tea and just sat quietly by the window. It was small, but it was real. Until the first letter arrived, a manila envelope, neatly typed, sealed with corporate precision. Inside was a cease and desist, trademark infringement. Apparently, the turning page was too close in name and function to a chain of upscale literary cafes owned by none other than Whitmore Lifestyle Group. I stared at the signature at the bottom. Gregory Whitmore. Of course. I read the letter twice, 3 times, then set it down and made myself a cup of tea. The old me, the one who had sat quietly through humiliations, who'd watched her husband's work be swept into someone else's empire, might have cried. The me I was now. She picked up the phone. "Claire," I said. When she answered, "I need a lawyer." "I've got a cousin," she said without hesitation. "Divorce attorney, but mean as hell and brilliant. She'll know someone." Within hours, I was sitting in front of Amanda Singh. Sharp bob, sharper mind. She read the letter without a flinch. "They're bluffing," she said. "No real case here. The name's different enough, and they'd have to prove market confusion, which they can't. But they'll try? They're trying to scare you." She leaned forward. "You have something they can't control. That's what bothers them." I exhaled. "So what do I do?" "Keep building, and let me draft a response that'll make them think twice." The next few days passed in a blur of legal lingo and back-and-forth emails. Amanda was a force of nature. She poked holes in their arguments, cited obscure case law, and CC'd 3 different departments to make sure it hit the right nerves. I didn't fully understand all the jargon, but I understood one thing clearly. I wasn't alone anymore. People were stepping in, standing beside me, and that changed everything. But of course, not everyone was rooting for me. Saturday morning, I arrived to find the front window cracked, a spiderweb of broken glass blooming from a rock on the sidewalk. Taped to it was a note, scribbled in red Sharpie. "Know your place." I stood there for a long moment, heart beating steady but hard. This wasn't just pushback, this was a warning. The police were polite but dismissive. "Probably a random act, ma'am. Could have been kids." Maybe, but my gut said otherwise. The timing, the message, the precision. It reeked of someone trying to rattle me. And maybe once, it would have worked. But I had learned something important over the past few weeks. Fear shrinks in the face of purpose. So I called the local glazier and had the window replaced the same day. I left the rock in the front window display, with a handwritten sign next to it that said, "Still standing." It made people smile when they walked by, and it reminded me I wasn't going anywhere. Ethan showed up that evening. He looked tired, like he hadn't been sleeping much. "I heard," he said, nodding at the new glass. "Liv's dad. He might have pushed this too far." "You think it was him?" "I don't know. But he's definitely furious that you're pushing back. He's not used to it." "Neither is your wife," I said dryly. He winced. "She's complicated. She's cruel. Ethan. And you're defending her because it's easier than admitting you married a reflection of everything you said you hated about your father-in-law." He said nothing. I didn't expect him to. "I just want peace," he finally muttered. "Then stop trying to silence people to get it. Real peace doesn't come from pretending nothing's wrong." He swallowed hard. "You're different lately." "I'm free." He nodded, slow. "It suits you." We sat together for a while. No yelling, no tension, just quiet. It felt like a truce, not perfect, but a beginning. The next morning, I returned to a surprise. The teenagers had painted something new on the side of the cafe, a wide-open book, pages fluttering, with one phrase scrawled across it in bold script. Turn the page. Write your own ending. Below it, dozens of signatures. Neighbors, friends, passers-by. I stood there, eyes prickling, hands over my heart. No note from the Whitmores, no crack in the window, no lawsuit could take that away. They were trying to shake me, but all they'd done was push me deeper into purpose. The mural stayed on the wall like a silent oath. Every time I passed it, the phrase rang in my mind like a bell. Turn the page. Write your own ending. I didn't realize how literal those words would become. 2 days after the window was replaced, I received a call from Amanda. Her tone wasn't urgent, but it wasn't casual either. "Meet me at my office," she said. I found something. Amanda's office was tucked inside a brownstone downtown, half covered in ivy and eternally smelling of old paper and strong coffee. She ushered me inside, closed the door, and slid a thin folder across the desk. "This came from a private legal archive I requested access to. Took some digging, but..." She paused. "Your husband's name is in it." My stomach twisted. I opened the folder and saw it, an old draft of a joint venture contract between Price & Sons Garage and Whitmore Engineering. But it wasn't the contract that hit me. Memo. Day before Leonard's heart attack. Subject: IP consolidation plan. From G. Whitmore. 2. Legal acquisition. Under pretense of partnership. Offer no royalties. List. Threaten non-renewal of municipal supply contract. This will create financial pressure. I blinked. Reread it. My fingers tightened around the paper. "They threatened him," I said, my voice dry. "They backed him into a corner." Amanda nodded. "He probably thought he had no choice. And the way this was worded, they never intended to honor anything long-term. They wanted his ideas, not his presence." My chest ached with the weight of it. He had come home so many nights, shoulders heavy, trying to smile through stress. And I'd believed him when he said things would be okay. But he knew. He knew what they'd done. And he took that to the grave. I walked out of Amanda's office in a daze. The city buzzed around me, but my mind was back in our old garage. Leonard's hands grease-stained, his laugh loud, his pride unspoken but alive in the hum of every engine he touched. They didn't just take his business, they took his dignity. And they thought no one would ever know. That night, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by yellowing invoices, faded blueprints, and the old photo of Leonard with Ethan. I traced his face with my finger, then looked at Ethan's. Just a boy in that picture. Innocent. I thought of how far we'd both come from that moment, and how far we still had to go. The next morning, I invited Ethan to the cafe. He arrived with hesitation in his eyes, but a cautious hope in his posture. I didn't waste time. I placed the memo in front of him. He read it slowly, his face draining of color as his eyes moved line by line. When he finished, he didn't speak right away, just stared. Finally, he looked up at me. "They knew," he whispered. "They planned it." I nodded. "Your father never told us, but he knew, and he carried that alone." Ethan's jaw clenched, "And now they're trying to intimidate you. Again. Which is why we're not backing down," I said. "This isn't just about me anymore. It never was." He sat in silence for a while, then nodded. "I want to help. Whatever you need." I smiled faintly. "Then start by remembering who your father really was and what he built." Later that week, I received another envelope, but this one wasn't from a lawyer or a corporation. It was from a woman named Diane Petros. The name didn't ring a bell. Inside was a handwritten letter, elegant and careful, like someone who still believed letters had weight. Dear Miss Price, I worked with your husband back in the late 90s. I was on the Whitmore transition team during the early acquisition phases. I kept my head down at the time. I was young, scared to lose my job, but I remember him. He was a good man, honest, patient, too trusting. When I saw your name in the news recently, I realized I couldn't stay silent anymore. I've enclosed copies of internal memos and a personal journal entry from the day we met. You deserve to know the truth. I'm sorry it took me so long. Diane. The envelope included more documents, none as explosive as the one Amanda had found, but all painting the same picture. Manipulation, quiet coercion, stolen designs. My hands trembled as I read, not with rage, with clarity. The story was falling into place now. And the ending? That was up to me. Amanda filed a formal request for public arbitration. No more backroom letters, no more whispered threats. It was going to be out in the open now. Whitmore Holdings would have to answer, and they weren't going to like it. That evening, I stood inside the cafe after closing, lights low, music soft in the background. I looked around at the mismatched tables, the books lining the walls, the mural alive with color. Then I looked at the framed photo of Leonard I'd hung by the register, him and Ethan in front of the garage, greasy hands and wide smiles. "This is for you," I whispered, "for everything they took, for everything you never said. I'll say it now." The morning Amanda submitted the formal request for arbitration, I expected silence, maybe another legal letter, or a visit from one of the Whitmore minions trying to settle quietly. I didn't expect Channel 4 News to call. A reporter named Isabel Tran left a voicemail, her tone professional but curious. "Ms. Price, I've reviewed the recent arbitration filing regarding Whitmore Holdings. I'd love to sit down and hear your story directly. Please contact me at your convenience." I sat with that message for hours. Part of me wanted to delete it, to keep everything private, but another part, the one that had grown louder with each humiliation, each stolen moment, each crack in the foundation of the lies I'd swallowed for decades, said it was time, not just to fight back, but to speak out. We met at the cafe 2 days later. Isabel was young, maybe early 30s, but her presence carried authority. She walked in wearing jeans and a blazer, notepad in one hand, tiny mic clipped discreetly to her collar. "I'll keep the interview respectful," she said. "You can review the final piece before it airs. I'm here to listen, not to exploit." I nodded. "Then let's talk." We sat at the table by the mural. I told her everything, from the day Leonard signed the deal that gutted his business, to the years of silence and struggle, to the moment Olivia spat those words at me during her wedding. I told her about the cease and desist, the cracked window, the memo Amanda uncovered, and the letter from Diane. She listened intently, her pen moving only when necessary, never interrupting. At the end, she looked around the cafe and said quietly, "You're not just building a business, you're rebuilding the truth." I smiled softly. Someone has to. The piece aired 3 nights later. 10 minutes on the local evening news. It opened with a shot of the mural, then panned to me behind the counter, apron on, pouring coffee for a retired teacher who visited every Wednesday. Then my voice came in, calm but steady. "They took my husband's work. Now they're trying to scare me into silence. But I've been silent long enough." The footage included old photos of Leonard in the garage, clips of Amanda speaking about legal intimidation, and even a blurred copy of the memo from Gregory Whitmore. The response was immediate. By morning, my phone was full of messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, old customers, neighbors, even strangers. "You're brave. My father went through something similar. Thank you for speaking up. How can I help? But not all the reactions were kind. An anonymous email arrived that afternoon. You don't know what you're starting. You're just an old woman chasing ghosts. Drop this before it gets ugly. I showed it to Amanda. They're getting nervous, she said. Good, I replied. By the end of the week, the cafe had more foot traffic than ever. People didn't just come for coffee or books. They came for solidarity. They came because the truth, once whispered, was now echoing across the town. And the Whitmores? They noticed. On Saturday, a black SUV pulled up outside. This time, it wasn't Olivia. It was Gregory Whitmore himself. He walked in without a word, flanked by a tight-lipped man in a gray suit who reeked of litigation. Gregory was older than I remembered from the newspaper photos, but he still had that air of entitlement, the kind that came from years of never hearing no. I assume you know who I am, he said, not offering a hand. I do, I replied. And I assume you're here to threaten me in person. He gave a cold smile. I'm here to offer a solution. This story of yours is inconvenient for both of us. I folded my arms. You mean embarrassing. For you. He leaned forward. We're prepared to offer a settlement. Quiet, generous. You drop the arbitration, retract your statements, and this goes away. I stared at him for a moment. Then I stepped around the counter and stood nose to nose with the man who had made my husband's final years a quiet torment. You already took his work. You took his dignity. You tried to take my voice. Now you think you can buy my silence? His jaw tightened. I didn't blink. You don't get to dictate the ending this time. I nodded toward the door. You can leave. He hesitated. You're making a mistake. No, I said. You did, 20 years ago. He left without another word. That night, the story went national. CNN picked up Isabel's piece and ran it in a segment titled David versus Corporate Goliath, One Widow's Stand Against a $1 Billion Empire. The footage was similar, but the reach, unimaginable. By morning, I had over 400 emails. Bookstores and cafes across the country offered support. A retired engineer from Michigan offered to testify about similar tactics he'd faced. A lawyer in D. Misatin offered pro bono assistance, but the one that stunned me most came from Ethan. A single message. He's afraid of you now. I've never seen him like that. I'm proud of you. Mom. The tides had turned. I wasn't the quiet mother in the corner anymore. I was the voice they'd underestimated, and I was just getting started. The morning Amanda submitted the formal request for arbitration, I expected silence, maybe another legal letter, or a visit from one of the Whitmore minions trying to settle quietly. I didn't expect Channel 4 News to call. A reporter named Isabel Tran left a voicemail, her tone professional but curious. Ms. Price, I've reviewed the recent arbitration filing regarding Whitmore Holdings. I'd love to sit down and hear your story directly. Please contact me at your convenience. I sat with that message for hours. Part of me wanted to delete it, to keep everything, but another part, the one that had grown louder with each humiliation, each stolen moment, each crack in the foundation of the lies I'd swallowed for decades, said it was time. Not just to fight back, but to speak out. We met at the cafe 2 days later. Isabel was young, maybe early 30s, but her presence carried authority. She walked in wearing jeans and a blazer, notepad in one hand, tiny mic clipped discreetly to her collar. I'll keep the interview respectful, she said. You can review the final piece before it airs. I'm here to listen, not to exploit. I nodded. Then let's talk. We sat at the table by the mural. I told her everything, from the day Leonard signed the deal that gutted his business, to the years of silence and struggle, to the moment Olivia spat those words at me during her wedding. I told her about the cease and desist, the cracked window, the memo Amanda uncovered, and the letter from Diane. She listened intently, her pen moving only when necessary, never interrupting. At the end, she looked around the cafe and said quietly, "You're not just building a business, you're rebuilding the truth." I smiled softly. Someone has to. The piece aired 3 nights later. 10 minutes on the local evening news. It opened with a shot of the mural, then panned to me behind the counter, apron on, pouring coffee for a retired teacher who visited every Wednesday. Then my voice came in, calm but steady. "They took my husband's work. Now they're trying to scare me into silence. But I've been silent long enough." The footage included old photos of Leonard and the garage, clips of Amanda speaking about legal intimidation, and even a blurred copy of the memo from Gregory Whitmore. The response was immediate. By morning, my phone was full of messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Old customers, neighbors, even strangers. "You're brave. My father went through something similar. Thank you for speaking up. How can I help?" But not all the reactions were kind. An anonymous email arrived that afternoon. "You don't know what you're starting. You're just an old woman chasing ghosts. Drop this before it gets ugly." I showed it to Amanda. "They're getting nervous," she said. "Good," I replied. By the end of the week, the cafe had more foot traffic than ever. People didn't just come for coffee or books, they came for solidarity. They came because the truth, once whispered, was now echoing across the town. And the Whitmores? They noticed. On Saturday, a black SUV pulled up outside. This time, it wasn't Olivia. It was Gregory Whitmore himself. He walked in without a word, flanked by a tight-lipped man in a gray suit who reeked of litigation. Gregory was older than I remembered from the newspaper photos, but he still had that air of entitlement, the kind that came from years of never hearing no. "I assume you know who I am," he said, not offering a hand. "I do," I replied, "and I assume you're here to threaten me in person." He gave a cold smile. "I'm here to offer a solution. This story of yours is inconvenient for both of us." I folded my arms. "You mean embarrassing? For you?" He leaned forward. "We're prepared to offer a settlement, quiet, generous. You drop the arbitration, retract your statements, and this goes away." I stared at him for a moment. Then I stepped around the counter and stood nose to nose with the man who had made my husband's final years a quiet torment. "You already took his work. You took his dignity. You tried to take my voice. Now you think you can buy my silence." His jaw tightened. I didn't blink. "You don't get to dictate the ending this time." I nodded toward the door. "You can leave." He hesitated. "You're making a mistake." "No," I said. "You did. 20 years ago." He left without another word. That night, the story went national. CNN picked up Isabel's piece and ran it in a segment titled "Day Corporate Galun Widows Stand Against a Billion-Dollar Empire." By morning, I had over 400 emails. Bookstores and cafes across the country offered. A reporter from Michigan offered to testify about similar tactics he'd faced. A lawyer in Delhi, Bono assistant. One that stunned me most came from Ethan. A single message. "He's afraid of you now. I've never seen him like that. I'm proud of you. Mom." The tides had turned. I wasn't the quiet mother in the corner anymore. I was the voice they'd and I was it. Amanda cleared the last plate from the cafe buffet table we'd turned into our war room. It was Sunday night, well past closing, and we'd spent the last 3 hours sifting through folders, timeline names of like all swallowed up by the Whitmore machine. The place smelled like old Amanda flowcharts to the corkboard we'd hung next to the espresso machine. "This is our strategy," she said, drawing a red circle around a 2004 acquisition that stood out like a bruise. "It's not just about Leonard anymore. This is a pattern." "Show me," I said. She walked me through it. 4 small family-run businesses acquired or pressured by Whitmore Holdings over a 15-year span. Each story eerily similar. Informal partnerships, pressure from municipal connections, sudden collapse or absorption, and no paper trail showing fair compensation. One name stood out, Tomas Alvarez. I remembered it vaguely. He ran a small parts factory that used to supply custom engine pieces to Leonard's shop. Leonard Tomas was brilliant, too good for how small his shop was. Then, out of nowhere, he closed up and disappeared from town. Amanda looked up his last known address. He moved to Albuquerque, went dark after 2011. Let's find him. It took 2 days and a favor from Amanda's journalist cousin, but we tracked him down. I called first, explained who I was. There was a long pause on the line. Then he said, "If this is about Whitmore, come see me. I've been waiting a long time for this." 2 days later, we flew to New Mexico. Tomas opened the door of a modest stucco home, weathered and sun-beaten, much like the man himself. His hands still bore oil stains, despite the years. His eyes, however, had dulled, less from age, more from defeat. He made us strong coffee, no sugar, no milk, just bitter truth. "They gutted me," he said. Made me think I was partnering with a rising empire. Gregory himself sat in my shop, told me we were going to change the market together. Then he pulled the rug out, froze my accounts, filed patent claims on my own blueprints. I didn't have the money to fight. Amanda was scribbling notes furiously. I leaned in. "Do you have proof?" He slid a binder across the table. Old faxes, letters, design sketches with dates preceding Whitmore's patents by months. And most damning, a signed memo from a junior Whitmore executive that mirrored the same tone of the one we found from Leonard's file. Strategic absorption disguised as opportunity. "Why didn't you go public?" I asked. He gave a tired laugh. "I had no one. No leverage, no cafe full of neighbors who believed in me." I placed my hand over his. "You do now." Back at home, Amanda built our case like a fortress, layered, reinforced, and brutal in its precision. Each piece of evidence another stone in the wall. The legal strategy was clear. Demonstrate a pattern of unethical business practices by Whitmore Holdings, tied directly to Gregory Whitmore himself, and show that Leonard Price was part of that chain, uncompensated, unacknowledged, and ultimately erased. Public arbitration wasn't just legal, it was symbolic. The entire town, the media, and maybe even regulators would be watching. We needed one more thing, a witness from the inside. Someone recent, someone credible. It came from the unlikeliest of places. Olivia showed up late one afternoon, not dressed in her usual armor of high fashion and sneers, but in jeans, a hoodie, no makeup. Her eyes were puffy. She looked human. "Can I come in?" she asked. I crossed my arms. "Why?" She hesitated. "Because I want to make something right." I let her in, but said nothing. Let her speak. "My father fired one of his assistants last week, said she was too curious. I overheard them arguing before he escorted her out with security. She was crying. I followed her, got her number. Her name's Jada." Amanda, standing at the counter with a silent coffee in her hands, raised an eyebrow. "You think she knows something?" "I know she does," Olivia said. "She told me he keeps 2 sets of books, one for the board, one for himself, that he intentionally mislabels acquisitions to bypass antitrust flags, and she mentioned your husband's name in a recent meeting." My stomach flipped. She said Gregory claimed the old woman will fold before arbitration, that he's betting on humiliation, said it's cheaper than payout. Amanda was already writing it all down. "We need Jada. I'll talk to her," Olivia said. "She's scared, but she believes what happened was wrong." I didn't thank her. Not yet. She didn't deserve forgiveness. Not until she earned it. But for the first time since the wedding, I saw a glimmer of sincerity behind her eyes. Not redemption, but recognition. The next day, Jada agreed to meet. Nervous, twitchy, chain-sipping iced tea as she spoke. But she handed over a flash drive. Contained on it, internal communication logs, calendar meetings labeled under code names that, when cross-referenced with public acquisition dates, painted a picture even a child could interpret. We had enough to light the match. Amanda smiled for the first time in weeks. "It's not just a case anymore," she said. "It's a reckoning." I walked home alone that evening, the fall air crisp against my cheeks. The town felt different now, not just in how people looked at me, but how I looked back. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't asking for permission to exist in spaces I helped build. Leonard's voice lived in the back of my mind, steady and warm. "You're almost there, Evie." And this time, I believed him. The arbitration was scheduled in a municipal conference center downtown. Rows of folding chairs, a long panel table, and microphones that screeched whenever someone adjusted them wrong. It wasn't glamorous, but it didn't need to be. The truth didn't need velvet curtains. It just needed a stage. Amanda stood beside me at the entrance, flipping through a final copy of our opening statements. Her eyes scanned with the precision of a surgeon, but her posture was unshakably calm. "You ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be," I said. The room slowly filled. Legal clerks, city officials, a few reporters, even a small camera crew from Channel 4, and in the far back, a cluster of locals who'd watched this story unfold from coffee counters and sidewalks, now waiting for the ending. Gregory Whitmore arrived last. He entered like a man used to making entrances. Dark tailored suit, 2 lawyers in tow, chin high. His eyes flicked over me like I was lint on a lapel. I didn't flinch. Let him pretend he still held the upper hand. That illusion was all he had left. The arbitrator, a stern woman in her 60s with a military posture and horn-rimmed glasses, called us to begin. Amanda went first. She opened with quiet force. "This is not a case about contracts. It's a case about character, about how power was used to destroy, to erase, and to silence." Then came the evidence. She presented the memo from Gregory's office, the one detailing the strategic removal of Leonard's input. Then she introduced Tomas's testimony via video, followed by Diane's journaled account and Jada's digital files. One by one, the pieces fit. The arbitrator listened intently, occasionally nodding. The Whitmore team objected twice, overruled both times. When Amanda sat down, the air in the room felt heavier. Then they called me to speak. I stepped up to the microphone, cleared my throat, and stared at my hands for a second. They didn't tremble. "My husband believed in people," I began. "He trusted them, maybe too much. He thought hard work and good intentions were enough, but they weren't. Not against men like Gregory Whitmore." I paused, looked right at him. "You didn't just take his work. You took his voice. And now you're trying to take mine." The room was still. You used the law like a blade. Cut families apart, shut down dreams, then packaged their remains and sold them as your own success story. But you forgot something. People remember. My voice didn't break. Not once. I'm not here for a payout. I'm here to make sure what you did to my husband and others like him doesn't get swept under another rug built from silence and money. When I returned to my seat, Amanda squeezed my hand beneath the table. Then Whitmore's team began. Their strategy was exactly what we expected. Belittle, distract, discredit. Emotional testimony, one of the lawyers said. No concrete proof of contractual obligation. Sentimental inference is not legal precedent. Then Gregory took the stand himself. He spoke smoothly, confidently, like a man accustomed to being believed. I respected Leonard Price, he said. We had business disagreements, but I never coerced or manipulated. This narrative, he gestured vaguely toward us, is a distortion fueled by bitterness. Amanda didn't even blink. When cross-examination came, she stepped up like a storm. Mr. Whitmore, were you aware of the memo sent from your office referring to the quiet acquisition of Price & Sons? I delegate many communications, but the memo contains your signature. I sign dozens of documents a week. Did you or did you not authorize code-named entries in your acquisition records, as documented by your former assistant, Jada King? My accounting methods are entirely legal, but not entirely transparent. He didn't answer. The arbitrator leaned forward. Answer the question, Mr. Whitmore, he smiled tightly. We operated within the law. Amanda didn't argue. She let that silence stretch just long enough, let it settle like dust. Then she delivered the final blow. We also have a copy of a private email sent by your head of acquisitions referring to the Price partnership as a token gesture for PR optics and noting your plan to absorb and discard. Would you care to explain that, sir? His jaw worked. His lawyers shuffled papers. I have no recollection of that phrase, but it came from your team. I cannot confirm that without reviewing it in full. Amanda held up the printed email. You'll find it on page 74 of your copy. The entire room turned as he looked down, finding the page. His face hardened. I'd like to request a recess, one of his lawyers said, clearly rattled. The arbitrator looked at the time. Granted, 30 minutes. Outside, the air was sharp and biting, but I felt like I could finally breathe again. Ethan was waiting near the stairs. He'd snuck in through the back. He didn't say anything at first, just offered me a bottle of water. I'm sorry, he finally said, for staying quiet for so long, for letting them twist the truth into something I was too weak to confront. I touched his shoulder. You're not weak. You're here. He looked me in the eyes. Whatever happens in there, I'm on your side now, and I'm not afraid of him anymore. Neither was I. When we returned, the arbitrator announced that a final decision would be issued in writing within 7 business days, but the room already knew, not because of some dramatic ruling, but because the truth, once spoken, cannot be unsaid, and because Gregory Whitmore, for the first time in his career, had no words left. 7 days stretched like wire across my chest. Each morning began the same. Coffee, silence, waiting. Even the cafe felt different. Customers still came, some offering quiet nods, others giving warm words, but their presence couldn't distract me from what hung in the air. The verdict. Amanda checked her inbox hourly. She'd try to hide it, but I knew. Her knuckles were tight on her mug, her screen time doubled, and every time the door chimed, both of us looked up as if expecting someone with an envelope and a final word. On the 5th day, I dreamed of Leonard. He stood by the garage, the sunlight catching his temples, arms folded across his grease-stained shirt. He didn't say anything, just looked at me with that half smile, equal parts pride and warning. I woke up with tears on my cheeks. The email came at 6:42 a.m. on the 7th morning. Amanda called me before sunrise. "Check your inbox," she said. Breathless, my hands trembled as I opened it. Subject, arbitration decision. Price vs. Whitmore Holdings, from Office of Municipal Arbitration. I clicked. I read. Then I read it again. Amanda was silent on the other end. "Finally," I whispered. "We won." The decision was clear. The arbitrator ruled in my favor, citing a consistent pattern of exploitative acquisition tactics by Whitmore Holdings, multiple violations of fair business conduct, documented intent to suppress intellectual property contributions from smaller partners, and emotional and reputational damages, compounded by recent attempts at intimidation. Whitmore Holdings was ordered to pay a public settlement, not just financial, but also a formal statement of acknowledgement and apology. The arbitrator had included a clause. Whitmore was forbidden from contesting the findings in any future public statements. It wasn't just a win, it was a binding truth. The cafe exploded in cheers by Nina. Word spread faster than wildfire. Locals showed up with flowers, balloons, and one elderly man even brought a Justice Brewed Fresh Daily sign he made himself. Ethan came by mid-morning. His eyes were glassy. "I read the decision twice," he said. It's everything he deserved." "No," I corrected gently. "It's everything we deserved." He hugged me. It wasn't stiff or awkward like before. It was real. His chin rested on my shoulder, and I felt something shift. Something unsettling I just could name, and we weren't turning back. That afternoon, the city's official statement hit the local papers. The headline read, "Whitmore Holdings censured in landmark arbitration. Widow wins fight for late husband's legacy." Channel 4 followed up with another special segment. This time, Isabel focused on the broader implications: small business protections, corporate accountability, and how one woman's stand opened a door for dozens of others to step forward. By day's end, Amanda's inbox was flooded with outreach, lawyers asking to join the class action she was now preparing, former Whitmore partners looking for their own justice, and reporters hungry to expand the story nationwide. But amid the storm, I remained still. I didn't need headlines or sound bites. I just needed the quiet. 2 days later, I stood outside the old Price & Sons garage. It had sat empty for years, dust caked on the windows, vines sneaking up the brick sides. Ethan met me there. He held a key in his hand. "City inspector signed off yesterday," he said. "Building structurally sound, still ours, technically." I turned the key. The door creaked open, heavy with time. Inside, the air was musty with grease and memory. Old tool cabinets, a pegboard full of rusted wrenches, a workbench with Leonard's initials carved in the corner, faint but visible. I ran my fingers over the wood. "We're not reopening a garage," I said softly, "but we are reopening a story." Ethan looked at me. "What do you mean?" "A community learning center," I said. "Workshops, mentorship programs, tech nights for underprivileged kids. We'll call it the Leonard Foundation." He smiled. That's perfect." "We'll teach them how to build," I added, "but more importantly, how to stand." The grand reopening took place 2 weeks later. Amanda helped file the nonprofit papers. Tomas flew in from New Mexico. Diane sent a video message from her cabin in Oregon. Jada, hesitant but proud, stood in the back row, watching with quiet pride. Ethan gave the opening speech, short, honest, raw. Then he stepped aside, and I took the microphone. I didn't read from notes. My husband believed that dignity wasn't something you asked for. It was something you held on to, Even when others tried to take it from you, I paused, scanning the crowd. He didn't get justice in his lifetime, but today, we give him something better, a legacy that outlives lies. Applause filled the room like sunlight. Later that night, after everyone had gone, I stood alone inside the garage, now stripped of grease but full of purpose. On the far wall, we'd painted a new mural. It was simple. Leonard's silhouette in front of the workbench, a young boy beside him, holding a wrench. Above it, a quote, "They can take your tools, but never your hands." I touched the paint, still slightly tacky. Outside, wind whispered through the alley, soft and familiar. "You were right," I whispered to the air. The truth does outlast them. The first week at the foundation was a quiet hum of nerves and hope. We hadn't even officially advertised yet, but word of mouth travels faster than flyers ever could, especially when you give people something they want to believe in. Our first visitor was a teenage girl named Maya. She wore her skepticism like armor, hood pulled up, earbuds in, one-word answers. But when I showed her the old drafting table Leonard used to sketch engine layouts on, her eyes softened. She pulled out a tiny notebook and asked if she could sit there to draw. I nodded and left her alone. By the end of the week, she'd filled 5 pages with mechanical sketches. Bikes, drones, some kind of wind-powered scooter. She didn't talk much, but she created, and that was enough. That's how it started. Not with a crowd, not with a banner, but with one girl who saw potential in a dusty room full of stories. Amanda stopped by with a stack of paperwork and a coffee the color of night. "You've got 4 mentorship applications, 2 interview requests, and a donation from a guy named Brent who used to intern under Leonard in '98, she said, placing the stack on my desk. He said Leonard was the only one who didn't make him feel invisible. I smiled. He never believed in ranks. Just respect. She paused, then held out another letter. This one was handwritten. It's from Diane. I unfolded the pages and read in silence. Diane had watched the foundation launch online. She said seeing Leonard's name attached to something alive again made her cry. She offered to lead a virtual workshop on intellectual property and business ethics for young inventors. I want to help them avoid the traps we fell into, she wrote. Let his name be their compass. That afternoon, we hosted our first community night. Ethan brought a projector, and we turned the old garage bay into a makeshift screening room. We showed a short documentary Amanda's cousin helped produce, highlighting local innovators, the history of small mechanics in our town, and the quiet war between soul and profit that had been waged in places like this for years. The garage was full. Some people sat on overturned crates. Others stood by the walls. And when the film faded to black, no one moved. They just sat in that stillness, the kind that only truth can create. Then someone clapped, then another, until the whole room rang with applause, not loud or frenzied, but steady, like rain after a drought. A week later, Tomas arrived in town. He'd sold his last machine and packed up the last of his bitterness, said he was tired of waiting for justice and wanted to be part of it instead. We gave him a spot in the back room to set up a hands-on mechanics class. By the end of the first session, he had a group of boys huddled around him, hanging on to every word as he explained the inner workings of a 2-stroke engine using parts he'd salvaged from a lawnmower. His voice, once rough with resignation, grew lighter with each passing day. This place, he said to me one evening, it gives people back to themselves. Jada joined next, quietly, humbly. She didn't want a title or attention. She just asked if we needed someone to help catalog the resources, maybe design a digital library. When I showed her the old storeroom filled with Leonard's notes, patents, half-finished prototypes, and scribbled ideas, she blinked back tears. Why didn't anyone know about this? She whispered. They didn't want it to exist, I said. "Well," she replied, placing her laptop on the table, "we'll make sure it does now." Not all moments were easy. Some days I walked into the garage and saw shadows of what used to be. Leonard bent over that workbench, grease on his knuckles, humming that off-key tune he always hummed when he was focused. Other days I saw the faces of those who'd never get the chance to rebuild like I had, people Gregory had silenced completely, whose names we might never know. But then Maya would walk in, headphones around her neck and a new blueprint tucked under her arm. Or Tomas would laugh so loud you could hear it from the street. Or Ethan would fix the hinges on the supply closet door without being asked. And I'd remember, this was the inheritance I was meant to leave, not just a name cleared, but a space reclaimed. By the end of the month, we had over 50 people in our network. Some came to learn, others came to teach, a few just came to belong. Ethan led a workshop on small engine troubleshooting, his nerves melting away with every question answered. Watching him teach, hands confident, eyes bright, I saw glimpses of Leonard in him. He wasn't following in his father's footsteps. He was carving new ones beside them. One night, as we cleaned up after another workshop, he turned to me. "You think Dad would be proud?" I looked around at the mural, the glowing faces, the room buzzing with the residue of purpose, and I didn't hesitate. "He already is." He nodded, quiet and sure. Then he added, "So am I." I stayed late that evening, locking up after everyone had gone. I stood beneath the quote on the wall again. "They can take your tools, but never your hands." I traced it with my fingers. Then, slowly, I pulled out a folded paper from my pocket, a letter I'd written but never sent. It was addressed to Gregory Whitmore. Not a threat, not a demand, just a single line. "You never broke us. You made us louder." I burned it in the old coffee tin Leonard used to keep spare bolts in. Some things don't need to be mailed. They just need to be released. Fall had rolled in gently. Golden leaves clung to the trees like they weren't ready to let go. The wind outside the garage was cool, crisp, and full of promise. Inside, warmth pulsed from the hum of voices and the steady beat of tools against possibility. Tonight was our last workshop of the season. The foundation would pause through winter, not to rest, but to plan, to dream, to grow stronger. I stood near the back, sipping tea as Maya led a group of younger kids through her newest design, a portable water filter system powered by a hand crank. She spoke with purpose, eyes lit from within. Tomas nodded approvingly from the corner. Jada tapped away on her tablet, cataloging everything like a proud archivist. Amanda walked in late, cheeks flushed from the cold, but beaming as she carried 2 boxes of printed guides she'd spent weeks putting together. Your invention. Your rights. Ethan adjusted a light above the mural, now framed in reclaimed copper piping. He'd become the quiet steward of the space, watching, fixing, and protecting what we'd built. I took it all in, every detail, every voice, every echo of the journey that had brought us here. Later that evening, we gathered in a circle. No podium, no speech, just people. Ethan handed me a mic, but I waited. Let the silence settle. Then I spoke. "I wasn't supposed to end up here," I said. "Not by anyone's plan, not even my own. I didn't think I had a voice left to raise. I thought the world had decided what I was worth. And then I remembered something. I glanced toward the workbench. That silence doesn't mean peace. Sometimes it's just the absence of resistance. And resistance," I smiled, "is where legacies begin." There were tears, smiles, nods, the kind of quiet that carries weight. "I'm not the hero of this story," I continued. "I'm just the one who stayed standing long enough to tell it. The real heroes are the ones who chose to build something after the fire, to plant seeds in the ashes. I looked to Maya, to Ethan, to Amanda, and those who never let truth die in the dark. After the gathering, Amanda and I sat outside on the cafe's back steps with warm mugs and tired feet. "You did it," she said. "We did." I replied. She turned to me, more serious now. "What's next?" I looked up at the stars, unbothered, unworried, infinite. More stories, more voices, more rooms where people are seen. She leaned against my shoulder. "You ever think about what Leonard would say if he saw all this? All the time. And," I chuckled, "he'd probably shake his head and ask me why I didn't charge admission." 2 weeks later, Channel 4 aired their final feature. The segment was called Full Circle, The Widow Who Rebuilt the Legacy. They filmed the mural, the workshops, the kids. They even captured a moment of Tomas teaching a boy how to sand down a bike frame, and Maya proudly explaining torque to a group of 10-year-olds. Near the end, the anchor posed a question. "Do you have a message for anyone watching who's ever felt like their voice didn't matter?" I looked into the camera, steady and calm. "Yes," I said, "you're not invisible, and your pain isn't irrelevant. The systems that failed you weren't broken by accident. They were built that way, but they don't get the final word. You do." Then I added, "Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for justice to knock. Be loud, be persistent, and find your people. They're out there, waiting to build with you." So now I'm talking to you. Yes, you. The one watching this from your kitchen or your bedroom or your car between jobs. Maybe you've been dismissed. Maybe someone tried to take something from you, your ideas, your name, your space in the world. I know how that feels. And I know how heavy the silence afterward can be. But hear me when I say this. You are not done. You are not too late. You are not too small. You are not forgotten. Because someone is waiting to hear your story. Someone is waiting to stand beside you. And maybe, just maybe, you're the voice that will give someone else the courage to rise. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own fight, your own fire, or your own father's hands at a dusty workbench, I invite you to share it. Subscribe. Comment. Send it to someone who needs it. Not because it boosts algorithms, but because it breathes life into something bigger than clicks and likes. This channel isn't just about stories. It's about reckonings, redemption, rebuilding. And it's just getting started. From my heart, and from all the people who stood with me in the ashes, thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing. And thank you for making space for voices like mine. Let's keep building together.